The distress calls were wrong. Dr. Kai Thuron had been studying Karathi vocalizations for 6 weeks, and he knew the difference between hunting calls, territorial warnings, and alarm signals. But this was something else, a sound he'd never heard before. Grief. That's what it sounded like. Against every protocol that said he should never interfere with indigenous species, Kai followed the sounds. His research station was 2 kilometers from the nearest Karathi settlement, far enough to observe without intruding. But the calls were coming from that settlement, and they carried a weight that made his chest tight. The Karathi were magnificent. Bipedal, 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in fur that ranged from silver to deep black. Wolf-like features but with primate-like hands and intelligent amber eyes that saw in spectrums humans couldn't. They lived in pack-based tribal societies, with strict hierarchies determined through dominance displays and combat prowess. Kai had observed their hunts, their territorial disputes, their elaborate social rituals. He documented their language, their tool use, their sophisticated cultural practices. He'd maintained careful distance, following every rule about non-interference. But when he reached the edge of the settlement and saw what was happening, every rule evaporated in the face of something more fundamental. In the center of the settlement, surrounded by a circle of adult Karathi, a small cub lay dying. Kai recognized the symptoms immediately: Vex serpent poisoning. He'd studied the native toxin extensively. It caused progressive paralysis, respiratory failure, and death within hours, fatal to Karathi without immediate treatment. The cub was maybe 5 years old in human equivalent. Small, its fur still showing the spotted pattern of youth, its breathing labored and shallow. Its body convulsed periodically as the toxin progressed through its system. Around it, adult Karathi stood in a perfect circle, not helping, not touching, just watching with postures that Kai's cultural database identified as ritualized mourning. They were letting it die. Kai had antivenom in his field kit, synthesized from his research, untested on living Karathi but theoretically effective. The biology was sound. He could save this cub, but he shouldn't interfere. First contact protocols were absolute. Observe, don't interact. Let natural events proceed without intervention, no matter how difficult. He watched the cub convulse again. Watched its small chest heave with the effort of breathing against paralyzed lungs. Watched adult Karathi stand motionless in their grief circle. Fuck the protocols. Kai stepped forward from his concealment at the settlement's edge, his hands raised in universal peace gesture. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Karathi warriors, massive, armed with spears and blades crafted from bone and stone, surrounded him within seconds. Their growls were deep enough to vibrate in his chest. Lips pulled back to reveal fangs designed to tear flesh. The pack's alphas, a mated pair who led through demonstrated dominance, pushed through the circle. The male was huge even by Karathi standards, his black fur marked with scars from countless fights. The female was smaller but moved with a grace that suggested she could kill just as efficiently as her mate. Kai's translator struggled with their rapid-fire language, catching fragments. Violation, sacred space, dishonor. He tried to speak in the trade pidgin he'd learned from observing merchant interactions. The cub, dying, I can help, medicine. The male alpha Korvesh, according to Kai's database, grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground with terrifying ease. His claws pressed against Kai's skin, not quite breaking it but making the threat very clear. You dare intrude on the passing. Korvesh's voice was a growl that Kai's translator barely processed. You dishonor the cub's journey with your presence. Kai choked out through his constricted airway. I can save him. The poison I have cure. There is no cure for Vex poison. The cub's strength was insufficient. He returns to the earth. This is natural law. Korvesh threw Kai to the ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. You will die for this violation. Warriors raised their spears. Kai saw his death in their eyes, swift, brutal, justified by his transgression. But all he could think about was the cub in the center of the circle, still breathing, still suffering, minutes away from death. Please. Kai pushed himself to his knees, hands still raised. Let me try. If I fail, kill me then, but let me try to save him. Why? The female alpha, Solara, spoke for the first time, her voice carrying genuine confusion. Why do you care about a cub not of your pack, not even of your species? Because he's dying and I might be able to help. That's reason enough. The answer clearly baffled them. Kai could see it in their expressions, in the way they exchanged glances with each other and the gathered warriors. In their culture, you protected your pack. Outsiders were competitors, prey, threats. The concept of helping another species young was incomprehensible. You waste our time with your alien weakness, Corvash snarled. You will die now, and we will return to honoring the cub's passing without further. He raised his spear for the killing blow. Kai didn't think. He just moved. He broke free from the warrior's grip, not hard when they weren't expecting resistance, and stumbled toward the dying cub. He dropped to his knees beside the small form, dimly aware of spears now pointed at his back, of growls of rage from the surrounding warriors. The cub was barely conscious. Its eyes were glazed, its breathing rapid and shallow. The bioluminescent patterns in its fur, which Kai had documented in his research but never seen up close, were dimming, fading like lights going out one by one. Kai knew he had seconds before the warriors killed him. He couldn't administer the antivenom. They'd stop him before he could inject it. He couldn't explain his intentions. They'd already rejected his offer to help. All he could do was offer the one thing that transcended language and species: comfort for the dying. Kai leaned forward and gently, reverently, pressed his lips to the cub's fevered forehead. A kiss. A human gesture of love and farewell. A wordless communication that said, "You are seen, you are valued, you are not alone." It was instinctive, compassionate, completely inappropriate by Karathi cultural standards, touching a dying pack member without permission, without being family, without being the same species. But Kai wasn't thinking about cultural appropriateness. He was thinking about a child dying while warriors watched in ritualized distance, and his human need to offer comfort overpowered every logical objection. The moment his lips touched the cub's forehead, everything changed. The cub's body jerked, not a convulsion but a response. Its breathing, which had been failing, suddenly deepened. The glazed look in its eyes cleared slightly. The bioluminescent patterns in its fur, which had been dimming toward death, suddenly pulsed with renewed light. Every Karathi in the circle froze. The warriors holding spears above Kai's back didn't strike. The alphas, who'd been ready to order his execution, stood utterly still. Kai pulled back slowly, as shocked as anyone. He'd kissed the cub's forehead as a gesture of comfort, expecting nothing except to offer solace to a dying child before his own death. He hadn't expected this. The cub was clearly improving. Not cured, Kai could still see signs of the Vex poison in its system, but stabilized. Its breathing was stronger. Its convulsions had stopped. It was no longer sliding inexorably toward death. "What is this?" Solara whispered, her voice carrying something between awe and fear. Kai looked at his own lips. They were tingling, slightly numb. He touched them with his fingers, and they came away with traces of the cub's bioluminescent secretions. The same substances he'd studied in his research, but never encountered directly. His saliva had mixed with those secretions where his lips touched the cub's forehead. And somehow, that combination had created a reaction. Kai's mind raced through his research. Human saliva contained hundreds of compounds, enzymes, antimicrobial agents, proteins that served various functions. He documented that Karathi bioluminescence was produced by specialized glands secreting complex organic compounds. But he'd never considered what would happen if those compounds interacted with human saliva. Apparently, they created something that counteracted Vex poison, or at least stabilized its progression. "The cub lives," Corvash said, his voice carrying profound disbelief. "The Vex poison should have claimed him by now. Yet he breathes, he strengthens. How? I don't know exactly, Kai admitted, his voice shaking. Something in human saliva must interact with your bioluminescent secretions. I'd need to run tests to understand the mechanism. You did this with your mouth, Solara interrupted. Her amber eyes locked on Kai with intense focus. You placed your lips upon our cub and he responded. This is not natural. This is not possible, one of the elder warriors corrected. Outsiders cannot affect the passing. It is sacred law that only pack may touch the dying. Yet the human touched, and the cub lives. More Karathi were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and the impossible scene. A dying cub that was no longer dying, an alien on his knees in the center of their sacred circle. An ancient Karathi pushed through the crowd. Her fur was completely silver with age, her amber eyes carrying the weight of decades. She moved with an authority that made even the alphas step aside. She stared at Kai for a long moment, her expression cycling through shock, recognition, and something that looked like grief. "The bonded ones," she said in a voice that silenced everyone. "The old stories speak true." The clearing went completely silent. Even the cub seemed to quiet, its breathing steady now, watching with eyes that were clear and focused. "Elder Vesha," Korvash said carefully, "what do you mean?" "In the oldest songs," Vesha said, her voice carrying the weight of ritual. "In the memories passed from generation to generation since before our packs first learned to hunt together, there are stories of the bonded ones. Another species who walked on two legs as we do, but whose skin was bare, whose bodies were weak, whose claws were useless." She gestured to Kai. "They were our companions before the great separation, before we knew ourselves as Karathi, before we learned to live by the law of dominance." She moved closer to Kai, studying him with those ancient eyes. "The songs say the bonded ones had the gift of healing touch, that their breath could purify poison, that their presence brought comfort to the sick and dying." "Myths," Korvash said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Stories to teach cubs about the old ways." "Are they?" Vesha gestured to the cub, now sitting up, weak but clearly recovering. "This human placed his mouth upon a dying cub, offered comfort in a way we have forbidden ourselves, and the cub lives. The Vex poison that should have claimed him has been countered. How do you explain this, Alpha, if not that the old stories are not myths but memories?" Kai found his voice. "The cub still needs treatment. What I did stabilized him, but the poison is still in his system. I have anti-venom, if you'll allow me." "Give it," Solara commanded, her tone brooking no argument. Kai administered the antivenom to the cub, whose small body accepted the medicine readily. Within minutes, the cub's condition improved further. Within an hour, he was conscious, weak but aware, looking around at the assembled pack with confusion and wonder. His parents, who'd stood in the ritualized mourning circle, forbidden by custom from interfering with the passing, broke down in grateful sobs as they were finally allowed to hold their child. The pack's hostility toward Kai transformed into something more complex. Not quite trust, he was still an outsider, but a wary respect mixed with the weight of memories they'd thought were only myths. Over the following days, Kai remained with the pack, not as prisoner now, but as something the Karathi didn't quite have words for. Guest wasn't right, neither was ally. The closest their language came was bonded one, the term from the ancient songs. Elder Vesha shared the old stories in their entirety, speaking in the formal ritual language that Kai's translator struggled to process, but managed to convey the essence of. Millennia ago, before the Karathi had developed their current culture of dominance hierarchies, they'd lived in partnership with another species. The ancient language called them those who walk without fur, or the soft-skinned companions. Clearly humans or a species remarkably similar. The partnership had been symbiotic. Humans provided healing, comfort for the sick and dying, and knowledge that didn't come from physical strength. Karathi provided protection, hunting prowess, and survival skills in environments too dangerous for relatively fragile humans. Together, They'd survived threats that either species alone would have succumbed to. But as Karathi grew stronger, more capable, they began to see the humans' compassion as weakness. The culture shifted toward valorizing dominance and strength above all else. Compassion became associated with softness, with inability to survive through power alone. Eventually, the Karathi drove the humans away. The song spoke of it as a necessary separation. The Karathi needed to prove they could survive through strength without need for the weak bonded ones. Generations passed. The partnership became myth. The Karathi developed elaborate cultural laws around the law of dominance, where the strong survived and the weak were allowed to die. Where helping those who couldn't help themselves was seen as dishonoring natural law. Where even saving a dying cub became forbidden because its inability to survive poison proved it was weak, and interfering with that death dishonored the cub's journey. "We have lived by this law for so long we forgot it was a choice," Vesha told Kai one evening. "We thought this was the only way, the natural way. We didn't remember that once we chose differently. That once we valued compassion alongside strength." She looked at the recovered cub, Torvek. Kai had learned his name was, playing with his parents under watchful eyes. "You showed us what we lost when you kissed that child's forehead. You showed us that strength and compassion are not opposites. That saving the weak doesn't dishonor survival, it honors life itself." Kai ran biological tests with the pack's permission, confirming what had happened. Human saliva contained compounds that, when mixed with Karathi bioluminescent secretions, created a powerful neutralizing agent against several native toxins including Vex poison. The ancient partnership made sense now. Humans would have provided medical care through physical contact that their biology made therapeutic. But more than the biological mechanism, Kai was struck by the cultural implications. "You built an entire society around rejecting what we represented," he said to Vesha. "Compassion, helping the weak, valuing life over strength. You made it sacred law to let the dying die without comfort. Why?" "Because we could not bear to need you," Vesha said quietly. "We were strong. We were capable. But you had power we lacked, the power to heal, to comfort, to preserve life through means other than combat. We drove you away not because you were weak, but because we could not accept that our strength had limits." She looked at him directly. "It is easier to call compassion weakness than to admit you need it. Easier to make a law against helping the dying than to acknowledge you cannot help them yourself. We built our entire culture on the foundation of that denial." Korvash had been listening from the edge of the conversation. The Alpha had been wrestling with something since the incident, his dominant posture occasionally cracking to reveal uncertainty. "I was ready to kill you for showing weakness," he said to Kai bluntly. "When you knelt and kissed the cub's forehead, in our law, that is the act of one too weak to accept hard truth, too soft to honor the natural order." "And now," Kai asked, "now I question whether our law is truth or just habit." Korvash looked at his pack, at the cub who should have died but lives. "Strength is important. Survival requires it. But we have elevated strength so far above all else that we stand and watch our young die rather than comfort them. We call it honor. Perhaps it is just fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear of admitting we need help. Fear of appearing weak by accepting that sometimes strength is not enough." The Alpha's admission was clearly difficult. "When I saw you kneel and kiss that cub's forehead, I saw weakness. An alien creature showing emotion toward something not even his kind. It disgusted me because it represented everything we've taught ourselves to despise." "What changed?" "The cub lived. Your weakness, your compassion, achieved what our strength could not. You saved a life we had already consigned to death." Korvash's ears flattened in what Kai had learned was a gesture of troubled thought. "That is a power we have forgotten exists." Word of the incident spread to other Karathi packs with the speed of wildfire. Within weeks, a gathering was called, something that happened rarely in Karathi culture, where packs maintained fierce independence and only came together for matters of existential significance. Kai stood before hundreds of Karathi, alphas, elders, warriors, cubs, all gathered to hear the story and debate its meaning. Some packs rejected it outright. Their commitment to the law of dominance was too deep. Their culture, too, invested in strength as the sole virtue. The idea that compassion might have value, that helping the weak might be honorable, challenged the foundations of their entire society. But others, especially those who'd lost cubs or elders to preventable causes, listened with ears that heard not just a story but a possibility, a chance to question whether their sacred laws served life or merely justified suffering. Elder Vesha addressed the assembly with the authority of her years. Our ancestors made a choice. They chose strength over compassion. They drove away the bonded ones and declared we would survive through power alone. For generations, this served us. We became mighty hunters, fierce warriors, strong packs. She gestured around at the gathered Karathi. But we also became a people who stand and watch our young die rather than comfort them, who call it honor to let sickness claim our elders without fighting, who have forgotten that true strength includes the power to protect the vulnerable, not just the power to dominate the strong. She pointed to Kai. This human knelt beside a dying cub and offered comfort when we offered only ritualized distance. His compassion, which we would have called weakness, saved a life we had already abandoned to death. He showed us that the old songs were not myths but memories, that once we knew a different way. What do you propose? One of the alphas challenged. That we abandon the law of dominance, become weak like the humans. I propose we remember what the law of dominance made us forget, that compassion is not weakness, that comforting the dying is not dishonor, that accepting help does not diminish our strength, it completes it. The debate raged for hours. Kai listened, occasionally answering questions about human biology or the ancient partnership, but mostly letting the Karathi work through what this meant for their culture. The turning point came when Torvik, the cub Kai had saved, walked into the center of the gathering. He was small among the assembled adults, but he spoke with the boldness of one who'd already died once and no longer feared much. I should be earth-returned, Torvik said simply. By our law I was weak, unable to survive Vex poison. The pack should have watched me die. That is what honor demanded. He looked around at the alphas. But the bonded one showed a different honor. He did not watch. He acted. He offered comfort when I was dying, and his touch gave my body strength to fight. I am alive because someone chose compassion over law. The young cub's voice carried across the silent gathering. I do not believe that makes me weak. I believe it makes me fortunate. And I believe we have been calling weakness what was actually our greatest loss, the knowledge that sometimes the strongest act is to help rather than to dominate. From a cub, the words carried weight that adults' arguments could not. The assembly didn't reach full consensus. Karathi culture was too deeply rooted in dominance hierarchies for that. But they reached something else: permission to question, permission to remember, permission to consider that their ancestors' choice was not inevitable, but simply a choice, and that different choices might be possible. Years later, Kai's research on Varath 4 had transformed into something unprecedented. A formal reestablishment of the ancient bond between humans and Karathi, not as dominance and submission, not as savior and saved, but as complementary